a lot of things to love about anime. The characters, the universes, the fights. But more and more nowadays, it feels as though the thing that separates a good anime from a great anime is a fleshed out and comprehensive power system. I mean, think about it. If somebody ever asked you what your favorite shonen of all time is, there's a fair to good chance that the shonen that you do mention has a pretty intense and involved power system. And that's not because powers need to be complicated, but rather because having a comprehensive, fleshed out, and easy to understand power system builds out the world around the characters living in it. If we, with the existing knowledge that we have of the power system that we're engaging in this universe, are able to point at something that somebody is doing and explain how they're doing it exactly, not only is that satisfying for the reader, but also it means that we understand the universe we're engaging with, fundamentally. But not every anime got the news about this, as some anime simply introduce powers and people with them and never necessarily explain how they got them, while some anime try to introduce a complicated power system, stick to their rules for a little bit, and then forget what those rules were somewhere down the line. And while technically neither of these scenarios make a bad anime per se, I have a lot more respect for an anime or manga world that's able to make a codex of rules about something that doesn't exist that people can understand and study like it's a college level course. Which is why today I want to talk to you about the greatest anime power systems in existence. The 10 anime that have made the most comprehensive, digestible, and easy to understand power systems I've ever engaged with. Because today we're talking anime's top 10 power systems, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all that, today I want to talk to you about a brand new sponsor to the page, Haikyuu Fly High, a licensed mobile RPG based off the beloved anime Haikyuu. Haikyuu Fly High wants you to experience the thrill of building your own Haikyuu-based volleyball team. Build your own dream team, challenge fierce opponents, and relive iconic Haikyuu moments. See, regardless of what team in Haikyuu you're a fan of, Haikyuu Fly High allows you to build a dream team composing of characters all throughout Haikyuu's timeline. You can strategize with your lineup by using different setter attributes, counter relationships, and team traits to outplay your opponents. You can recreate signature moves of Haikyuu players like the famous quick attack and use ultimate skill animations to pull off incredible offensive or defensive plays, all in breathtaking remastered high quality. It's never been so easy to dive into immersive volleyball matches, effortlessly directing serves, blocks, and spikes. And detailed animations cover every spike in its result, showing you in real time the fruits of your efforts. Play long enough and you'll unlock iconic player duos to activate powerful bond attributes like Hinata and Kageyama. But there's so much more than just volleyball. There's also immersive and rich minigames that cover everything from training-based construction to expedition training to trivia challenges to get you fully immersed in the world of Haikyuu, all while you encounter adorable chibi characters and discover fun missions and mini games along the way. On top of that, the entire game is voiced over by the original Japanese voice cast. So if you got a hankering for some more Haikyuu Fly High's got you. So what are you waiting for? Pre-register to download Haikyuu Fly High today using the link in my description. Those who pre-register will get 25 recruit tickets and 800 diamonds. It's about time you got to step into the world of the greatest sports anime of all time. So before we get to jumping into rating these power systems, I want to talk about the criteria in which these power systems are going to be graded. Each of these power systems is going to be graded on 3 crucial points. The first point is complexity. How many layers is there to this power system? Do people just have powers because they're born with them? Can people awaken to the powers? Can they use different powers based off their personalities? So on and so forth. The second rule is rule following. After this universe establishes the rules of its power system, do they stick to those rules? And the third rule is going to be ease of understanding. How good of a job does this universe do at explaining its own power system? We're going to be ranking each of these power systems from 1 to 10 on those 3 criteria, and their combined scores are going to add up to give us our ranking. So I'm going to try to make this video as fair and as well calculated as possible. You know, in the most power system way possible. It's also important to note here that even if a power system is towards the bottom of our list, that doesn't mean it's a bad power system. We're talking about the top 10 greatest power systems in anime. While being the 10th greatest power system is definitely not as good as being the first greatest power system, neither of those things are bad, so put your pitchforks away. Now, the reason I'm saying that right here and now is because coming in last place at number 10 is cursed energy. I know, I'm sorry, don't hit me. But listen, there was absolutely a time in my life when I believed the cursed energy had the capacity to be the greatest power system of all time. And fundamentally, for like a half to 2/3 of JJK, it did have that potential. In fact, cursed energy is one of 2 power systems on this list that got a 10 in complexity, because cursed energy is wildly complex and hugely individualistic. There is no set way that cursed energy is supposed to be used. The Zenin are able to summon Shikigami. Jogo is able to boil entire cities. Gojo can teleport with his blue, push things away with his red, combine them and make purple, and vaporize entire mountains. And almost all of this is built up on a robust, complex, and usually pretty well explained power system. However, unfortunately, the closer the JJK got to its ending, the less and less cursed energy made sense. Whether it be Yuji's domain expansion never really being explained, Sukuna spamming binding vow after binding vow with really no consequences, or techniques being used at the end of the story seeming way weaker than they were when they were used earlier in the story for reasons that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And unfortunately, that was kind of the double-edged sword of cursed energy. While it was wildly complex and built on this gorgeous, well-fleshed-out power system, unfortunately, as time constraints and pressure started to push Gege down, a lot of that complexity was thrown to the side for convenience. And while an anime where the power system is not incredibly complicated, like MHA or Chainsaw Man, those changes may not be as easily noticeable because, after all, they're just born with these abilities. Who's to say whether or not they can get stronger or weaker, do whatever they're doing? When we have a complex college-level power system that people spend hours studying, when things start to not line up with what we know, it feels lazy. And because of that, in the rule-following category, cursed energy only gets a 3 out of 10. On top of that, cursed energy is also tied for last in the ease of understanding category.
Oh, Nick, what do you mean? I understand cursed energy perfectly.
That's great. I'm so happy for you. Take it for somebody who spent literal years making their job being explaining JJK and cursed energy. The majority of people who read JJK needed videos like mine to understand what was going on. People like me who would reread the chapters multiple times, Google, do research to explain things like Hakari's domain expansion, Kirara's curse technique, how Yuta was able to switch into Gojo's body, how he was able to maintain a barrier even after his body collapsed, what was going on with Yuji's domain expansion, how he was able to use dismantle on the barrier between Megami and Sukuna's souls. Well, yes, of course, you understood cursed energy. A lot of people didn't. And that wasn't their fault because it wasn't that well explained. And when it was well explained, a lot of the rules that were well explained eventually got broken. And those who did understand the power system got frustrated with the power system by the end of the story because every rule they had learned was being broken simply because Sukuna was making a binding vow that he wouldn't eat ice creams on Tuesdays for all years that end in 8s. So cursed energy, out of a possible score of 30, gets a 19 and our 10 spot. Coming up next in our 9 spot is something that's going to be slightly controversial considering the fact that I just said cursed energy is our 10 spot, but whatever, it's currently barreling its way towards being a better manga than JJK. So in the number 9 spot, we have devil powers from Chainsaw Man.
But the devil powers are so incredibly uncomplex. How could you put that over the complexity of JJK?
Well, you're right. In terms of complexity, devil powers only get a 3 out of 10. Devil powers are incredibly straightforward. In the Chainsaw Man world, you fall into 4 categories of power users. You are either a hybrid like Denji, a fiend like Power, a human with contracts like Haki, or a devil like... I don't want to say the 4th one. Like the Tomato Devil. We'll go with the Tomato Devil. And that's established very early on in the story, and it still hasn't fundamentally changed even now. Hybrids are the strongest because their regeneration ability, then goes regular devils, and then goes fiends, and then goes humans with contracts. If you want to contract with a powerful devil, you have to give up a lot to that devil. Depending on what you're willing to give up to that devil, you can summon them at an even greater strength. Like the difference between giving up a fingernail and your heart is exponential in terms of devil strength. Fiends have a basic regeneration ability like hybrids, but they're not immortal like hybrids. And devils, when they die, go to hell, and if they die in hell, they come back to earth. Devils that look more like humans tend to be more sympathetic towards humans, and that's basically everything. So complexity in terms of power system is not necessarily Chainsaw Man's strength, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If there's one category you can have a low score in, I feel as though complexity is the best one to have. There's nothing wrong with a non-complex power system, so long as it's done well. And Chainsaw Man's devil power system is done pretty well. From a rule-following perspective, I gave Chainsaw Man's devil power a 7 out of 10. And the only real reason that Chainsaw Man's getting docked any points in this category is because there's a couple of unknowns that exist in the manga right now that may or may not break some rules. Like right now, without any spoilers, technically cloning is a possibility, and we may be able to clone not only devils, but also humans. Now, what would this mean? If one of the clones dies, does that clone sentience go to hell if it's a devil? Or is this cloning ability a devil power? On top of this, there's been a couple of moments that have mucked up a couple of the rules that have been introduced, like primal devils having ridiculous powers that may or may not have anything to do with the ideas that they're based off. On top of this, devils are created from very abstract ideations. The Blood Devil is one of the highest ranking devils in all of Chainsaw Man, not because a ton of people are afraid of blood, but more because in specific circumstances, everybody is afraid of blood. Like, I personally am not afraid of blood, but if I was bleeding out, I would be afraid of blood in that moment. And thus, devils can either really be explained to be as powerful as they need to be or as weak as they need to be. But a 7 in terms of rule following isn't all that bad. It's just hard to say that the rules are being followed when the rules themselves are very vague in a very basic power system. However, in terms of ease of understanding, Chainsaw Man gets a 10. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who's confused by the power system of Chainsaw Man. Yes, some moments in Chainsaw Man, especially recently, have been a little bit perplexing, but fundamentally, that doesn't have much to do with the power system. So Chainsaw Man gets a 20 out of possible 30. Up next at number 8, we have Tau, also known as the power system of Hell's Paradise. Now, to those of you who are anime only for Hell's Paradise, Tau may not seem all that complicated. It's kind of like Chakra, right? No, not at all. Outside of the fact that Tau in the Hell's Paradise universe is a life force like Chakra is life force in the Naruto universe, there are basically no similarities. Well, that's not true. Tau is also elemental, and certain elements are strong against other elements like they are in the Naruto universe. However, that is where the similarities end. See, Tau is sneaky, one of the most complex power systems in all of anime. In fact, in terms of complexity, it's tied for second on this list with 9 out of 10 points. But why? What makes Tau so incredibly complicated? Well, the fundamentals of Tau are confusing to begin with. See, because, well, Chakra is a life force that runs through everyone's body in the Naruto universe, and Tau is much the same as it's the source of everything in the Hell's Paradise universe. The control of Tau was actually much more complicated than the control of Chakra. Yes, they both have circulatory systems. Yes, you can run out of both, and that has a deadly effect. But the fundament of Tau is based in the concept of yin-yang, and the idea of following an ancient Buddhist ideology of following the middle way. See, Buddhism, like a lot of other religions, is not a religion that tells you to strip yourself from all worldly pleasures. Buddhism instead preaches the idea of following the middle way. Don't live in excess, but also don't strip yourself from everything you enjoy. And thus, Tao becomes its strongest in the Hell's Paradise universe when somebody is able to acknowledge the good and the bad of all of the things in their life. When somebody is able to acknowledge the dark and the light, stillness and motion. However, unfortunately, acknowledging the middle way is kind of different for every single person. If you get angry without love also being in your heart, your Tao goes out of whack. And these emotional spikes or physical acknowledgments from every single one of these characters who's trying to strengthen their Tao can get a bit complicated sometimes. And on top of that, Tao has 5 elements. And each of those 5 elements strengthens another element and weakens another. So you can use your Tao if you have the right elemental mixing to strengthen somebody or sap all of their Tao out of their body. But there's also Tao currents and flower Tao that allows for regeneration and hybridization if flower Tao gets into a human body and they're able to battle against the arborification. You can sense with Tao, you can enhance your body with Tao, you can suppress your presence with Tao, you can fire Tao bullets, you can make elemental attacks like lightning, you can heal people from a distance, you can restore broken things, you can crush people using telekinesis, you can make illusions, you can clone yourself, you can do basically whatever you want with Tao. Like ninjutsu. Yeah, ninjutsu exists in the Hell's Paradise universe, and thus because basically anything is accomplishable with Tao, it gets a 9 out of 10 in terms of complexity. However, in the categorization of rule following, it only gets a 5. See, because while Tao is a wildly complex power system, it's only really complex in what it can accomplish. See, because while Tao can accomplish basically anything you ever want it to, it's very rarely explained why in minute details why certain people are able to accomplish certain things with their Tao. Why can Rian clone herself using flower Tao when other people can't? How are some people able to create illusions with their Tao when other people can't? What aspect of Tao allows for psychokinesis? And so on and so forth. In the Hell's Paradise universe, when things happen, they're usually just explained as, oh, That's Tau. And thus Tau in the Hell's Paradise universe kind of becomes a fix-all. You want something to happen? Well, Tau can make it happen. And because of that, Tau's not that hard to understand, but its complexity with lack of understanding can leave some people scratching their heads. So in terms of ease of understanding, Tau gets a 7 out of 10, leaving it with a 21 out of 30 score. Up next after Tau, we have one of the least complex power systems in all of modern day shonen, because coming up at number 7, we have Quirks. See, Quirks in the My Hero Academia universe are not complex. You're either born with them or you're not. The only complexity that gets injected into the My Hero Academia quirk system is all for one and one for all. And thus, just like with Devil Powers from Chainsaw Man, Quirks get a 3 out of 10 in terms of complexity. Because, well, yes, some complexity is injected through all for one and one for all. The quirk systems of MHA doesn't have other complex throw-ins like hybrids, fiends, and devils who can reincarnate between hell and earth. And fundamentally, the quirk system in MHA, even though non-complex, is a really good power system. 80% of the population are born with quirks. Those quirks can vary in terms of power depending on the quirks of your parents. Some people are heteromorphs, some people aren't born with quirks, and some people are born as living squeezy bottles. However, where MHA truly shines is showing how people with relatively mundane quirks achieve great heights of power. Like Sero with his tape arms, a quirk that allows him to shoot tape out of his elbows, effectively becoming MHA's Spider-Man. And because the rules of the MHA quirk system are pretty straightforward, MHA does a really good job of following the rules that it sets for itself, and thus, in terms of rule following, it gets a 9 out of 10. Now, I would give the quirk system a 10 out of 10 in terms of rule following, but in a system where anybody can kind of do whatever they want because it's the ability that they're born with, giving that system a 10 out of 10 in terms of rule following doesn't feel that genuine to me. Because what do you mean Invisible Girl can now redirect lasers through her body? Yeah, I have no leg to stand on to say that she can't do that because it's her superpower that she was born with, but there's a lot of situations like that in MHA where characters are born with an ability that we're told works one way. Then as that character trains and gets stronger, their ability works in a new, more interesting, more powerful way. And there's really no way to dispute that because it's just who they are. The best example of this is somebody like Sun Eater, a character who was introduced as being able to turn his hand into clams if he ate clam chowder, who was eventually able to eat Nejire's energy and turn his arm into a gigantic energy railgun. I can't say he can't do that because there he is eating Nejire's energy, but to give a universe that has that kind of leniency a 10 out of 10 in terms of rule following, to me, doesn't feel right. But I will give MHA a 10 out of 10 in terms of ease of understanding. Because yeah, you can sit there and you can watch Sun Eater eat Nejire's energy and go, oh, I guess he can eat energy now. Oh, his arm's a cannon. I guess that makes sense. It's his quirk after all. I can watch Kirishima bash himself into harder objects to make his body harder because yeah, if you microfracture bones, they get harder, and that's how his quirk works. I can now watch Momo be able to print an entire railgun from her non-reserve of fat because yeah, she made a bunch of Russian dolls earlier. And even the complicated quirks in the MHA universe, like All for One and One for All, are both just essentially stockpiling quirks. Yeah, Deku, Shigaraki, and All for One all have multiple quirks. That's why they're powerful. Cool. Got it. Thus, MHA's quirk system gets a 22 out of 30. Up next after quirks in our number 6 spot, we have Pyrokinesis from Fire Force. Now, Pyrokinesis is a sneaky complex power system. What seemed like originally to just be, oh, I have fire out of my hands. Oh, I have fire out of my feet. Oh, I have fire in a sword, became really anything but that by the end of Fire Force. But it's definitely not the most complex power system of all time, and thus Pyrokinesis is getting a 6 out of 10 in terms of complexity. Now, this is garnered off the fact that there are multiple kinds of powered people in the Fire Force universe. There are second generations, like Maki, who have the ability to control existing fires. Third generations, like Arthur and Shinra, who have the ability to create their own fire and manipulate it. There are hybrid second, third generations, like Benimaru, who have the strength of flame control of second generations, but their own ignition ability. But there is also fourth generation pyrokinetics, like Sho and Shinra, individuals who have awakened an Adola burst by making an Adola link, by receiving an Adola grace from either the Evangelist or the Woman in Black. And these fourth generations have pyrokinetic abilities that blow other pyrokinetic abilities out of the water, whether it be freezing the entire universe to stop the movement of time, or breaking their body down into subatomic particles so they can travel faster than the speed of light. Adola links, and just the Adola in general, is what makes this power system a lot more complex complex than it seems at a surface level. However, on top of all this, flames can be used in a myriad of ways in the Fire Force universe. They can be used to create plasma swords or to buff your abilities like with Tamaki, to create flame missiles or flame chain guns like Takaru, can be turned into electrical signals like with Haumea, or even can be channeled through a buffing whistle that allows for Ponko Pot to buff someone's flame resistance. Hell, flames can even be channeled into the redirection of kinetic energy, and thus while Pyrokinesis is by far and away not the most complex power system on this list, it definitely deserves its flowers. However, because these pyrokinetic abilities can be channeled into pretty much anything, the rule-following category of Fire Force only gets an 8 out of 10. Because in a universe that did start off with only 2nd generation and 3rd generation pyrokinetics, who have the ability to either control flame or create flame, evolving into a universe where people can buff each other with whistles or turn their smoke into kunai doesn't necessarily align with the original power system as it was foretold. But Fire Force does do a pretty good job of staying on track with the rules that it sets for itself. And it also does a pretty good job of explaining basically anything that's happening at any point in the story. Even as the story begins to involve the Evangelist and the Adola and Doppelgangers, all of these events are tied into the power system of Fire Force really well. And thus, for an ease of understanding score, Fire Force is going to get a 9 out of 10, giving it a 23 out of 30. Up next after Pyrokinesis in our number 5 spot, we have a spot that people probably aren't going to enjoy, because coming up at number 5, we got Alchemy. Alchemy is not that complex of a power system, or at least it's not as complex as people want you to believe that it is. However, whenever you want to describe alchemy to somebody, you have to use some big words like the law of equivalent exchange, and thus everyone believes, oh wow, this must be a crazy complicated power system. But it's really not. Yes, the deeper you delve into alchemy, the more complicated it's going to seem. But fundamentally, there's really only 2 rules in alchemy. The law of equivalent exchange, which states that you can't make something out of nothing, something has to be converted into something else. And secondly, the law of natural province, which states that you can only turn something like this metal here into, let's say, a different kind of metal if it has the key ingredients that make up that other kind of metal. I can't turn fudge into a hydrogen bomb because there isn't the components to make a hydrogen bomb in fudge. Now, yes, there are different transmutation circles. And yes, in the 2003 anime, there was things called transmutation arrays. And alchemy allows for the creation of things like homunculuses and allows for you to bind human souls to suits of armor. And the secret of the power of alchemy is that Father is pumping his energy up into a mestria. Well, alchemy, which comes from a different country, taps into the chi of the world, which is why it's more often used in healing than deconstruction and reconstruction. Really, when it boils down to it, alchemy is a pretty simple power system. You take something, and if it's heavy enough and has a similar enough chemical compound to something else, you can turn it into something else, unless you have a Philosopher's Stone, in which case you can do really whatever you want. And thus, alchemy from Full Metal Alchemist gets a 6 out of 10 in terms of complexity. Where alchemy truly shines is the fact that it follows its own rules. In fact, following the rules of alchemy is literally the entire plot of FMAB. You can't do human transmutation without a Philosopher's Stone. If you try to turn something into something that it can't turn into, there's things like rebounds. A transmutation circle is necessary for alchemy to be pulled off unless a part of you exists beyond the gate. And alchemy and alchemy work differently because they feed off different energy sources. Different transmutation circles make different kinds of alchemy. Ed has to clap his hands together because he has to come into contact with the part of him that's in the gate, and by clapping his hands together, he makes a circle. Al also has to clap his hands together, but only to make a circle and not to touch the part of him that's in the gate, because the entirety of him exists behind the gate. Philosopher's Stones, which seemingly have a limitless amount of power, require literally hundreds of thousands of people to be sacrificed, and so on and so forth. FMAB does a fantastic job at following its own rules, and thus in rule following, it gets a 10 out of 10. Any moment that something happens in FMAB, there is a solid and concrete answer to explain exactly why that thing happened from a power perspective. However, unfortunately, in the ease of understanding category, alchemy only gets an 8 out of 10. The differences between the manga, the 2003 anime, and the 2009 anime, when it comes to things like how transmutation circles work, if transmutation arrays work, how Scar's tattoos work, how human transmutation works, how the Philosopher's Stone works, makes trying to consume all of the knowledge of this universe a bit tedious. On top of that, everything surrounding the truth and the gate can get a bit complicated, so alchemy gets an 8 out of 10 in terms of ease of understanding, giving it a final score of 24 out of 30. Now, coming up for spots 4 through 2, we technically have a 3-way tie. Every single one of these power systems got a 26 out of 30. However, they all got different scores in different categories, except for ease of understanding, where they all got a 10. So technically, 2 through 4 are all tied for second. So there's no hierarchy here, but we gotta do one first. So coming up at number 4 is Haki devil fruits. Now, out of the 3 power systems that are tied for second, One Piece's power system got the lowest ranking in terms of complexity, with a 6 out of 10, which would tie it with things like Pyrokinesis and Alchemy in terms of complexity. In the One Piece world, there's 3 types of devil fruits and 3 types of Haki: Zoan, Paramethea, and Logia, and Armament, Observation, and Conqueror's Haki. Every powered person in One Piece falls under one of these 6 umbrellas. Haki users like Shanks, Mihawk, and Zoro use a combination of Armament, Observation, and Conqueror's Haki to either understand what somebody's gonna do before they do it, strengthen their body or their blades, or knock out entire groups of less strong users around them with Conqueror's Haki. Devil fruit users fall under the 3 categories that we talked about earlier: Paramethea, Logia, or Zoan type. Paramethea users are the most complex, as the Paramethea devil fruit users really encompass anybody who has a devil fruit ability that falls outside of the categorization of either Logia or Zoan. Basically, it gives them a superhuman ability that's not categorizable, like the Hana Hana no Mi or the Flower fruit that Robin has that allows her to make clones of herself or grow her body parts elsewhere. After Paramethea, there's Zoan type devil fruits that just allow you to turn into a different thing, like Luffy's devil fruit, which was originally thought to be a Paramethea type, but is actually a mythical Zoan type, with the thing that Luffy is able to transform into being the sun god Nika. And last but not least, the rarest type of devil fruit, and widely thought to be the strongest kind of devil fruit, is the Logia type, which allows you to turn your body into an element of nature, be that smoke, lightning, light itself, mud. And the only defense against these kinds of devil fruit users is Haki. It's not a complex power system. It exists in a complex universe, but the power system itself is very, very straightforward. And thus, in terms of complexity, devil fruits and Haki get a 6 out of 10. However, in both rule following and ease of understanding, it gets a 10. There are so many times that Oda could have taken the lazy route and said, oh, well, devil fruit users aren't weak to the ocean anymore, because he wanted to do an arc where Luffy had to go swimming or something like that. And even though Oda reads his own wiki to remember what his story was about and what the rules of his universe are, he apparently reads it enough, because there are very few moments in the One Piece universe where the power system of the universe and the battles that unfurl don't follow the rules that are established by Oda earlier on. In fact, pretty much the only time that we got anything that looked like even remotely like a curveball in terms of breaking the rules is when devil fruit awakenings were introduced during Dressrosa. But that was explained not only quickly, but also well, which is why One Piece's power system also gets a 10 in terms of ease of understanding. Because anything that happens gets meticulously explained over the course of 5 episodes, because they gotta fill showtime. And thus One Piece's power system of Haki and devil fruits gets a 26 out of 30. And tied with that 26 out of 30 at our number 3 spot is Bleach's spiritual pressure power system. A power system that is just a teensy bit more complicated than One Piece's, but doesn't do as good a job as following the rules as One Piece's. See, Bleach's power system is complicated. Not as complicated as a couple of other power systems, but is still pretty complicated. But unfortunately, a lot of the complication around Bleach's power system just comes from the fact that it's in like 4 different languages. Nick, what do you mean? Well, Quincy powers are in German, Rancor powers are in Spanish, and Shikigami powers are in Japanese. Unless, of course, you're watching the dub, and then some Shikigami powers are in English, while others just stay in Japanese. And that's when we're talking about Ryatsu and Ryoku, which is just spiritual pressure and spiritual power, and Ashvalin and Seros. The power system can seem wildly intimidating, but it's actually not all that complicated, and it's also explained really well. All power in the Bleach universe revolves around 2 things: Ryoku and Reishi. That's like spiritual power and nature power. Shikigami and the Rancor are powered by Ryoku, and when they release that power, that's Ryatsu. However, Quincy's are able to absorb the energy of the atmosphere, that's called Reishi, and they're able to turn that energy into weapons like bows and swords. Now, Ryoku is kind of used for everything in the Bleach universe: increasing your speed, which is called Ho-Ho, casting spells, which are all referred to as Kido spells, but actually fall under 3 classifications: Bakudo, which is a binding spell, like barriers or seals; Hado, which are offensive spells; and Kaido, which are healing spells. On top of that, Ryoku is also used to increase somebody's strength, and most importantly, to use the special abilities of a Shikigami Sanpakuto. And while it feels as though the Rancor have their own entire set of powers, they basically just use Ryoku in the same way as the Shikigami, but say it in Spanish. Whether it's firing compressed energy balls, opening portals to travel between dimensions, or using a Resurrección, which is basically their version of a Bankai. But listen, as I'm saying all of this out loud right now, I'm realizing that Bleach's power system is a bit more complicated than I gave it credit for a couple of hours ago when I started this video, especially because we've barely talked about the powers of the Quincy. So in terms of complication, I'm actually actually gonna give Bleach an 8. But as I'm sitting here trying to use my German, Spanish, English, and Japanese words to describe a power system, I'm gonna have to dock a point from that 10 of ease of understanding I said that this power system had. It is well explained, but it is not easy to understand. But I was right in my assessment that it gets a 9 in terms of rules following. Because Bleach, even though it is very complicated and it feels as though every new group of people has a different set of powers, oh my god, I forgot about the Fullbringers. There are rules set up for every individual group, and they follow those rules religiously. Now, unfortunately, as genetic lines get crossed, as Arankars get Quincy crosses, and Ichigo collects all of the Infinity Stones of every race, unfortunately, sometimes the rules do get a bit blurry. And considering the fact that spiritual energy, a bit like Tao, just seems to have the ability to do whatever you want it to, especially when you consider the individuality of a Zanpakuto and Bankai release, I just can't give Bleach a 10 in terms of rules followed. So by adding a point to complexity and taking a point away from ease of understanding, Bleach still sits at a 26 out of 30. Which brings us to our last 26 on this list, Chakra, which I believe to be one of the most complex, deep, and well thought out power systems in all of anime, which is why I gave it a 9 out of 10 in terms of complexity. And yes, does Naruto not have explanations of its powers in 4 different languages, and every new group of people gets a new different type of ability? No, it doesn't. But that doesn't mean that the power system of Naruto isn't incredibly complex. There are multiple categorizations of different kinds of powers that somebody can allocate to get as strong as they want in the Naruto universe. In fact, the Naruto universe is truly a pick-your-own adventure. Whether you want to become a master of the 5 elemental releases, like Hiruzen Sarutobi, and use fire release, mud walls, high-pressure water jets, lightning strikes, and wind gusts to make yourself a threat on the battlefield, or you want to focus on yin-yang release and use a yin-based jutsu like Genjutsu, or a yang-based jutsu like the Akamichi's calorie control, or the dojutsu like the Byakugan, the Sharingan, or the Rinnegan, you're granted access to entirely new jutsus that nobody else has access to. Whether that be something like Gentle Fist, where you strike at chakra points to increase the chakra flow at that point or stop it entirely, or the extrasensory perception of the Sharingan that eventually turns into the MS that allows you things like Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi and Susanoo, or the power of the Rinnegan that allows for you to pull meteors from the sky and hurtle them in armies. There's also Senjutsu and multiple kinds of Senjutsu, be it frog or snake. There's Shinchuriki, who channel the power of the tailed beasts inside of them. There's Kekkei Genkai, Kekkei Toda, Kekkei Mora, and there's now things like Shinjutsu, the fundamental principle jutsus of the gods that have been watered down over generations to be used by humans. But don't forget, if you just want to toss hands, there's always Taijutsu and things like the 7 heavenly breaths and the 8 gates. There are 8 million ways to be incredibly powerful inside the Naruto universe, and thus every single person's powers are a reflection of who they are. And thus, in terms of complexity, Naruto's power system gets a 9 out of 10. But for rule following, it gets a 7 out of 10. The lowest out of the big 3, who are all tied for second place here. Listen, Naruto's complex power system is sometimes its biggest weakness. Events like Hiruzen being able to seal away the soul of Hashirama, Tobirama, and half of Orochimaru at 70 years old don't make a whole lot of sense when you understand how Reaper Death Seal works. The same could be said for Minato being able to fight an entire battle against Obito and then go seal half of Kurama using Reaper Death Seal. Us understanding that Susanoo requires the usage of 2 MSIs gets a bit complicated when we see Madara use Susanoo with no eyes. Sasuke being able to summon Garuda, his hawk summon to the lava dimension, proves that summoning contracts can work across dimensions. So hypothetically, there was no real reason to gather all the Kage together to summon Team 7 back from Kaguya's dimension, as they could have been reverse summoned by any of the connections they had on Earth. And thus, unfortunately, the more complex you make a power system and the more you make it understandable to those digesting it, the more strict you have to be about the idea of following those rules. And unfortunately, Naruto slips up with that a lot more than the other 2 entries from the big 3. However, in the ease of understanding category, Naruto's power system is very easy to understand. Yes, I've dedicated an entire career to explaining Naruto, and yes, I get questions about Naruto's power system every single day. But Naruto does a quite literally industry-leading job at explaining its power system, even though it's incredibly complicated. Naruto's power system, just like Bleach and One Piece's, gets a 26. So, Nick, if all 3 of the big 3 power systems are tied for second place, what's in first? Well, I'm so happy you asked, because it's the only perfect power system in all of anime and manga. And that would be, at number 1, Nen. Yeah, I'm gonna spoil it. Nen gets a perfect 30. Nen is by far and away one of the most complex anime power systems in existence. Not only is there 6 affinities that a Nen user can fall into, those being enhancement, transmutation, conjuration, specialization, manipulation, and emission, but within the confines of those categorizations, the possibilities are almost endless. Enhancement can mean you're turning your right jab into a punch so powerful that eventually it'll be compared to a small nuclear missile, but it can also mean that you've enhanced your smell to the point where you can sniff out Nen users in a crowd. Emission can be firing Nen bullets from your fingers or creating a Nen dragon to ride on. Specialization can vary from being able to steal other people's techniques or predict the future in a poem, and so on and so forth. Nen can help you accomplish anything. And that's just within the categorization systems, as there are also basic principles to Nen that everybody has access to. Things like Ren, Ten, Ken, Sho, Gyo, and so much more. On top of this, battles that revolve around Nen require a constant adjustment of where your Nen around your body is. If you're trying to deliver a punch, you deliver your Nen to your fist, but if you're trying to block a punch to your chest, you try and put as much of your Nen there as possible to heighten your defense. On top of this, if you're an enhancer, you're not good at manipulation or conjuration abilities, and you have an 80% proficiency in emission and transmutation abilities. On top of this, the personality of somebody largely dictates what Nen category they'll fall into. And when you start to introduce outliers from this system, like Nen beasts from the Hakki Empire, whose powers revolve around using ancient Hakki Empire tools and the blood of the princes, there's really nothing that you can accomplish in the Hunter x Hunter universe through Nen. And there is no universe more stringent about following the rules that it's laid down than the Hunter x Hunter universe. There are no, and I mean this, no power-related plot holes in Hunter x Hunter. Everything has consequences. Every show of immense power comes with a trade-off, and while sure, Alika's able to grant as many wishes as Killua wants, that's explained word for word. In fact, pretty much anytime a new and novel concept is introduced to Hunter x Hunter, we take pages, if not chapters, to explain it. And while many would say that that's a weakness of Hunter x Hunter because Togashi is always over-explaining, if you're actually reading what Togashi is saying, understanding how the power system of Nen works is very simple. On top of this, while Nen has a binding vow-esque restriction ability that allows you to make deals with yourselves or others, or just take risks to make your abilities more powerful, Togashi never cheapens Nen power and training by simply making somebody ridiculously powerful and unkillable without any consequences coming. Because, well, yes, absolutely, restrictions and deals are made to make characters very powerful, most notably like with Gon, but the restriction and deal that turned Gon into a threat whose claws could possibly reach Meruem almost cost him his life, and has now, at least currently in the manga, cost him the ability to use Nen. Actions have consequences, and because of that, to me, Hunter x Hunter has the perfect power system, giving it the only 30 on this list. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What would your list look like? And what anime to you has the perfect power system? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Whew! I feel like early Dragon Ball the way I'm assigning these arbitrary numbers.